Hello, everyone. Welcome to the February 2023 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. This evening, we've got a very special program in that we're going to be talking with three TAF members who have just published new books, 2 novels and a memoir. So I'm going to talk to them about the inspirations for their books, some of the challenges in writing it, their outreach to readers, and more. So let's get started. We'll do this alphabetically. So Sue Barnett, who is written
Anger.
as Sue Anger. And your book is called Last Known Port.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit, Sue, about what your book is about.
Okay. It's set in my hometown of Beaufort, North Carolina. That's not to be confused with Beaufort, South Carolina. It's near Morehead City. And as I said, I grew up there, but I'm sorry. So a young man sails into Beaufort in 1923, and he's looking for his brother. And he sails up to the dock and he learns that his brother is missing at sea. So because it's prohibition, he goes out to the middle of the harbor and gets totally wasted that night, thinking his brother's dead and he'll never see him again. And when he wakes up, his brother's dog is on the dock. Dun, dun, dun. So we spend the rest of the book looking for his brother and, running rum and stuff like that.
What was the inspiration for this story?
Well, if you've ever been to Beaufort, they've done a very good job preserving it. It's a very old town. And if you look at the old maps, it was one of the biggest towns on the East Coast, a very, very active port. People would come around Cape Hatteras and come in. And there were no roads out of Beaufort. So all the traffic coming into Beaufort was off the ocean. And there's a strong Caribbean influence. A lot of the houses have a Caribbean architecture. So at some point in my life, I just started interviewing a lot of people. They have a very unique accent, saying the toy was say hoy. That's kind of hard to write, by the way. And I started interviewing people, and I kept writing these little stories, and then I wouldn't like them very much. And finally, I started to write this, and I said, "Oh, I like this." So I think you finish projects that you like, and that was more or less my inspiration.
How long did it take you to write Last Known Port?
Oh, I wish you wouldn't ask me that. That wasn't on the pre-approved list of questions, Don. The reason why I'm reluctant is if I ever really do get a bona fide publisher, I don't want them to know how long it took me. And it took me probably a little bit more than 10 years. But, I had a family and a job and stuff going on. But also what I realized, and I wanted to get into this later, was I really feel like writing my first book is like going to graduate school and taking the same class and flunking it 10 times. And by that is like, the more I learned about writing, the more I learned about craft, the more I learned about character development and tension and pulling a plot through, I would just rewrite. And, I'd rewrite the whole thing. In fact, when I first started, I said, I'll just go down and I'll interview a few people that lived through 1930, and I'll set my book in 1930. And I finished a draft. And this really did happen. People don't believe me, but it really did happen. And I read that draft, and I'm sorry, was that me?
No,
I read that draft, and I said, this is a very sad story. This is in the middle of the Depression, and it's sad. And I was drinking a glass of wine, and I said, oh, Prohibition. So I moved it up 10 years. So yeah, it took me about 10 years.
Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the other ways that you research the topic to kind of inform your story?
Well, it's a lot easier now. In the last, say 5 years, there's been a real community in Carteret County that's doing a lot more to get stories down. But at the time, I was doing as much as I could online. There's a lot of old navigational charts. Mostly the UNC library puts those out, and there's some state archives. But I just found any excuse I could to go down to the ocean And they had several historical sites there, and I would go through their archives and I'd interview people and I'd talk to people. But it took me a while. My experience has been, I bet Jennifer's had this too, is you start to write and you think you know what you need to research, and then you get into it and I'd be like, did they have indoor plumbing then? I mean, just very specific things came up, and sometimes they're really hard to find the answers to. So at various times I would just avoid that. Like, people never went to the bathroom in my book. So, but things like phones, like how many people really had phones. And what I kind of found out later, I put in things like a record player, like a phonograph. But probably the last true history I read, I mean, people in Beaufort were really poor. It's sort of a destination port now. None of the local people can really live in town because everything is $1 million. Jim Goodnight's discovered it and put in this massive, things like that. So, but when I was growing up and even earlier, I mean, it was really a ghost town for a long time. Fishing had been the primary industry and a lot of people were poor.
So what for you were the greatest challenges was it a greater challenge to research, the actual writing? For you, for this particular novel, what was the most challenging aspect?
My damn publisher. No. Well, as I was writing it, as I said, I was learning how to write a story. And what I discovered about myself is that I can't write an outline. And I finally compromised and I can outline maybe 7 chapters. But like my first draft is out. And there was just a part of me that said, oh, I have to know how this story is going to begin and end. For example, I didn't know who the killer was. I didn't know who killed my victim until I wrote it. And for me, that was kind of scary. You know what I mean? Like I would think, oh, I'm just going to write this from beginning to end. And that I think when I learned to accept what kind of writer worked for me. So that was probably the hardest. And then with publishing, I got accepted by a traditional publisher. Sorry, there's a lot of drama going on right now in my house. So I'm trying really hard to ignore it. Dog barking, stuff like that. But I got accepted by a traditional publisher and they went out of business. It was a startup and a lot of people lost money. I didn't. I hadn't been printed yet. So I said, to heck with this. I'm just going with a hybrid. And then they did all sorts of things like, I'm sorry, was somebody talking? Oh, I guess Marcia, you still got your mic on. With the cover, the first cover, I had sent them a bunch of pictures. I had said, this is what I want. These are the colors I want. It's 1923. And they took one of the photographs that I had given them that I took last week. And it was 2 guys sort of wearing Velcro, had an outdoor motor on a fiberglass boat. And I said, this isn't 1923. And I wanted a female at the helm. And the project manager said, oh, sorry, is somebody talking?
Let me see. No, I think we're good.
Okay, I keep hearing.
Yeah. Oh, here, wait a minute. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay. I think we're good.
She said, oh, is your book written in 1923? And I said, have you read my book? And she said, oh, no, I never read the books. This is my project manager. This is the only person I can talk to at the publisher. And I said, do you want me to send you a synopsis? She said, no, that's good. So we went through about 7 drafts. And finally, I just hired somebody, to make my cover. Because I think your cover is like 90% of your publicity.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it actually brings me to my next question, Sue, because I want to talk a little bit about how you are promoting the book, how kind of engaging your readers and potential readers. And I know most of this probably falls on your shoulders. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing to spread the word?
Well, not enough. I think my weakness is digital marketing. I'm learning that. I'm sort of on a learning curve with that. I've had the most fun at events. And I know a lot of writers are introverts. I happen to be a super extrovert. It's very hard for me to sit at my desk all day long. So I'll go to the Christmas shows and, wrestle people to the ground to buy my book. And I feel very proud of it. I feel very comfortable. I feel very comfortable of the cover. So, the other vendors sort of get aggravated with me because, I'll be in front of the desk and I'll be talking to people about my book. And if they're not going to buy it, I get them on my mailing list. I put them on my newsletter. I give them a card. I went to Vistaprint and I put the cover of my book on the card with a little bit of a synopsis on the back. And I put my proper name on it, Don. So it's very helpful to use the right name. Okay.
Well, Sue, it sounds like a really wonderful story, and congratulations. And this is your first novel, right?
Yeah.
Right? Have you published any fiction before?
Well, just to finish your other sentence about the publicity, I did set up a website. I set up a Facebook page. Everyone says things are happening on Instagram. TikTok makes my head hurt. I've done some podcasts. That's a ton of fun. And there's this new thing called, I think it's called Bookshop or something like that. I've done local bookstores. Everyone's been very receptive. It's a lot to keep up with. I feel very uncomfortable at author signings. Oh, this is why I wrote my book, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to make it funny. And the other thing, when I'm at events, I always give people candy.
Always a good idea.
I have no shame, right? If I could give them a drink, Prohibition, I would. I am making some signature drinks for the 4 main characters. There's a lot on Facebook. There's a lot of writing groups and we share books. I post on those. Sometimes they don't let you, but I post a lot of questions so people know who I am. That's kind of easier to keep up with than, actual brick and mortar groups, I'm trying to get on Goodreads. I don't know what it is with Goodreads. They keep saying I didn't write the book. They keep spitting it back to me. A lot of people are saying that you can get a lot of mileage out of book clubs, and I'm exploring that. But my friend who selects for book clubs, she goes, you have to have at least 50 reviews, 50 reviews before they accept you. So that's the hardest thing, is getting reviews. And you can do that with advanced copies, but it's a ton of work. So.
Okay. Excellent. Again, congratulations, Sue. We'll open this up to audience questions for our 3 authors after the 3 of them have spoken. So, Sue, congratulations and thank you. Let's turn next to Marcia Herman-Giddens and her memoir, which is titled, let me make sure I get this correctly, Unloose My Heart, A Personal Reckoning with the Twisted Roots of My Southern Family Tree. From the title, this sounds like a fascinating story. Marcia, tell us a little bit about what this book is about.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Don. Yeah, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I have a hard time remembering the title. It's so long because I picked the first 3 words, Unloose My Heart, was mine, but then the publisher picked the rest, and they had a hard time. I think that leads into what it's about, because they told me, my editor told me, they never, as the University of Alabama Press, and that they never had such a hard time figuring out a name for a book. So it's probably not ideal. So it's really 2 books in a way, because it's part memoir, as you mentioned, about my growing up in Birmingham, where I have just arrived. You know that, but maybe some of the late joiners, I mean, literally just a couple hours ago, arrived for the beginning of a book tour here. And so I grew up during Jim Crow, because I'm 81 years old. So that tells you I went through all of that. And then in the early 60s, became involved through the Unitarian Church with civil rights movement. And then in the 64 and 65, I ended up in Tuskegee, Alabama, in 64 was one of the first few white people that went to some classes there. It was a special summer program, but that combined with my family history of on my mother's side of being enslavers, which I had grown up with. I had known about it from as early as I can remember. And for whatever reason, it always bothered me a lot. And that's kind of one of the mysteries I think of about people is I know plenty of people that have enslavers in their family, and it didn't weigh on them as much. It just constantly bothered me. So it's an interweaving of and a kind of going back and forth between my life growing up and then doing research on my ancestors and the human beings they held in bondage, because I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know, because I'd heard stories that I knew couldn't be true. I wanted to know what was true.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on why you wanted to learn this, but also to report this in a book? What is not a goal exactly, but what is your reasoning for telling your family
Right.
story?
Well, the idea for writing it down, it wasn't really for a book. I wanted to write, after I got to a certain point, I have kids and grandkids, and now I have two great-grandchildren. I realized that I had been through a lot of really interesting events and had done a lot of really interesting things in my early life, because the memoir actually stops when I moved from Birmingham, which was 1966. So it doesn't include the rest of my life. And so for years, I had been thinking, I need to write this down for my children. I want them to know, because a lot of what I experienced is not, you can't just find it in every book, because it was this very small white community that was involved in civil rights. So I had been thinking of writing for a long time, but not necessarily a book. And then things happened with the, I guess, with the slavery side of my family. Do you want me to tell that story? It was what really, as
Sure.
I say
Yeah,
to
please.
some people, really got me off my butt and said, okay, I got to write this. And trying to be really brief, I took a road trip, which was fabulous, by myself in 2015, and went on the Natchez Trace. And as part of that, I have to leave out all the details, but because of doing that, when I was researching some family history later, I learned that my grandfather had been murdered on the Natchez Trace in 1804 when he had gone to Louisiana just after the Louisiana Purchase was made. And so I knew his name. It's Robert McAlpin. And then in 2017, on Christmas night, and so all this time, things are swirling in my head, I should try to write something sometime. Christmas night, we all the family had gotten sick and we had to cancel everything. We had all these plans. And so I was messing around with the laptop because I felt sick and felt bad, and I typed in this name. And up comes the story about his son, who was named after him, Robert McAlpin Jr., probably being one of Harriet Beecher Stowe's model for Simon LeGrand. And I got cold chills when I read that. And I thought, my God, okay, this is it. I really need to research and see what went on in my extended family, ancestors and so forth. So that's kind of what started it all.
What did you find most challenging about this project, Marcia?
Well, at first it was how to do the two together, because as I said, it really seemed like two separate books, but I didn't want to write two separate books. And they did fit together, in ways. So it was really hard. I spent a whole summer trying to figure out how to weave or braid those two threads, two lines together, and write a proposal. And of course, that was new to me, because as you had asked before everybody joined, this is my first non-scientific writing, so I didn't really know what I was doing. So that was challenging. And then, of course, when I got into the research, just learning a lot of what I learned was very hard. Very. Sometimes I felt like the punch in the gut, that kind of thing, like ancestors buying and selling children, and raping their female slaves, all of that. Yeah.
Was your family encouraging of this project?
Well, of course, my parents have been long gone. My children were, yes, and my first husband, who was their father, I'm remarried for a long time, very encouraging. And one of my first cousins, fortunately, was also not only encouraging, but really helped. It's her line too. She wanted to know, and she shared my feelings. But another cousin, I must say, I think I've about lost, because she's not happy at all with it.
I can understand. Tell us a little bit about how you're promoting this book. You said you're on a book tour. You're in Alabama right now, so you're on a book tour, which is awesome.
Of course, I heard Sue and what she said. I thought, oh boy, I wish I could do all that. I don't like it. I'm an introvert, so I don't like any of this. It's very hard. It takes energy, and I'm not doing a lot. And unfortunately, the marketing department in the University of Alabama Press lost their staff, and then the head of it got really sick, and she's been out of work for months. So for a long time, I was just on my own. So I just did what I read you should do. I started a website. I decided, okay, I'm not doing Instagram. It's just too much. I did Facebook, and reached out for some local readings. Basically, just one has happened because they made me promise not to do any more for 6 weeks. And now I'm in Alabama, where I did have some help, but some of it I've initiated myself. But the ongoing social media stuff, it's hard. I don't like it. So it's hard, and I actually researched hiring a publicist. And when I saw a minimum price of like around $12,000, I thought, well, forget that. But of course, I do want people to buy the book and read the book, because I'm not making money on the book. That's not what it was about, like a lot of friends think, when like this tour, they think I'm getting paid lots of money. And I thought, what, are you kidding? I wish, so it's hard. I don't have any good answers for how to do that, unless you got a lot of money and hire somebody to do it.
Are you inspired to write another book as a result of this experience?
Actually, yes. And should I live long enough and have some time, made discoveries. I mean, the whole process there were painful parts, but there were also just incredibly exciting parts. Like I've, of course, learned, I knew it anyway, but that's another story. But I learned more I have many, many, many African-American cousins, and I've been fortunate enough to meet some and become very close with them. And several of them have fascinating stories. So yeah, I have some ideas, and I'm starting to do research on another project.
Wonderful. That's great. Congratulations on this project, Marcia.
Thank you.
It sounds like a fascinating book. It really does. I look forward to reading it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
And next up
Thanks so
is
much.
Jennifer Delamere, Jennifer Harrington, who writes as Jennifer Delamere. And her book is, Holding the Line. So published by Bethany House Publishers. Jennifer, tell us a little bit, is this a standalone novel for you, or is this part of an ongoing series?
It's the last of a series, the third in a trilogy, about 3 female electric telegraph operators in Victorian London in the 1880s. And this last book the woman's a little bit different from some of the usual historical romance heroines. She is a young widow, and her first marriage wasn't that great. And so she is determined to live a life on her own. But she ends up overhearing a young lady who's about to be led astray by a roguish aristocrat, and decides to intervene, even though that's not typically her way of dealing with people. And so that leads her into some interesting new paths. And so it's very different, and it was a lot of fun for me to write. And I loved being able on this series to explore female telegraph operators in the 1800s, because that was sort of the first job where women were kind of on the same par as men. And so it led to some interesting circumstances in real life too.
where did, I want to hear about that, but where did this idea come from?
I am a huge history buff. I will read just about any kind of historical nonfiction that comes my way, especially if it involves the 19th century. And so I read a book called The Victorian Internet, and it was all about the electric telegraph and how it changed the world at that time, made it smaller, news traveled, opened the door for long distance romances, for scams, for all the things we think of today that the internet gave us in the 1990s and going forward. And so as soon as I read that, and then I read that women were involved, as I said, pretty much from the beginning, because it just took brains. It did not take brawn. And so I thought, well, I've got to write about this.
Explain the title.
The title, The Victorian Internet?
No, Holding the Line.
Holding the Line. Well, I have kind of a play on words with the whole series regarding lines, since we're talking about the telegraph, and telegrams play a part in all three of them. And in this one, she's trying to prevent a young woman from making the very same mistake she made when she was younger. So that's kind of where the concept of holding the line comes from.
I know you do a lot of research. I'm sorry?
She becomes a mentor to a 17-year-old girl who essentially, she has adults around her, but no one that's really paying attention.
I know you do a lot of research for the books that you write in that particular era. Tell us a little bit about how you researched this particular one.
This one I started with the Victorian Internet. I also read a great book published actually by University of Chapel Hill Press called My Sister's Telegraphic. And it was all about women in the telegraph industry. And that gave me a lot of really great ideas for how to proceed. And so the whole series was kind of based along those lines. And then for this character in particular, I just thought I wanted to do something a little different. So I have a woman who's a little bit older, a little bit wiser, a little bit sadder, but who manages to work through a lot of the bad things in her past in order to find a new beginning, as it were.
How do you research the minutia of the era in which you're writing? Little things like food or clothing, or the small things of life itself, but are really important to a story.
Well, I've been doing that. I've written 9 books now that are all set in Victorian London, 1850 to 1880. And so I've done a lot of research as far as the food, the clothing, the social mores. There's a great book by Liza Picard called Victorian London, The Life of a City, 1840 to 1870. And that was kind of my real groundwork. I'm actually writing a blog right now for a website called Shepherd.com, which is really great. They want to present themselves as sort of a competitor to Goodreads, and authors can write blogs about their 5 favorite books on a particular subject. And so I'm working on the 5 books that made me want to set my novels in the Victorian era. So, so that's really on my mind right now. And that's one of them. Yeah.
Did you find Hold the Line more challenging than your previous books, or are you finding these books less of a challenge, you know what I mean, to write and research? And are you in a groove now?
From the content point of view of Victorian England, I am in a groove. In my personal life, over the last 3 years, I've lost my father and my brother and my very best brainstorming writing partner, all to protracted illnesses. And so it was very hard to write while that was going on. And this book, Holding the Line, is always going to mean a lot to me because it was the last one that my writing buddy helped me brainstorm. And there's a lot of her fingerprints all over that book. And so it was hard from a personal point of view, but I do love Victorian England, and I feel like I know it, which is exactly why my next book is going to be set in the 1920s. If I get that far.
Are we still in London?
No.
Oh.
We're on a transatlantic ocean liner.
You've got 9 books under your belt now. How do you promote yourself?
Well, that's something that has kind of fallen through, as Sue noted, how difficult it is. And Marcia, you have to do the online. I do Facebook. I have a web page. I have a newsletter. I got started on Instagram about 8 or 10 months ago, which I totally love, but I haven't gotten very good at it yet. A lot of what they call bookstagrammers are on Instagram, and if you can get them talking about your book, you can get a long ways. But so that's it. That I'm trying to do the online. My publisher helps a lot. Also, they have been arranging some interviews and blog posts. And I had somebody reach out to me recently. If you're interested, I can post the link, but I'm on YouTube talking for about 40 minutes about how I do historical research via newspapers, the British Newspaper Archive.
I'd love
how I use that for fodder for my book stories.
I'd like you to share that with the group through the listserv, Jen. That sounds really interesting. If you could maybe do that tomorrow, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I can do that.
That'd be great. Well, congratulations on holding the line. It sounds like a great book. It really does. And congrats on having 9 novels. That is just fantastic.
Thank you.
Do you find the writing process easier now?
No. I am a plotter, unlike Stu. Although I kind of wish I was a pantser in some ways. Maybe it's like the way people with straight hair thought they had curly hair and vice versa. But I'm a plotter, so I have to know the end before I start. And so I guess the process, I'm familiar with my process now, but that first draft is always really hard for me, which is why it affects me to have lost a brainstorming buddy, because I really bounced a lot of things off of her. So I just kind of figure out a new process every time.
That's great. So does anyone have any other questions for Marcia or Jennifer or Sue? Anything about the books themselves, the process, anything at all? All right. Well, ladies, thank you so very much for joining us this evening. This was great fun. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on all 3. I'm sorry, Sue?
I just wanted to add one thing, particularly to Jennifer and Marcia. One of the groups that has really helped me with publicity is Women in Publishing, and and to everyone else, their conference is entirely virtual, and it's next week. And the early bird resignation was only about $100. I don't think it's much more than that. And then you can have access to all the whatever for like a year, all the taped whatever. And I just to follow up on something everybody else said, it's going to be my stories are going to be a trilogy, and I have started the second book. The second book is just a breeze compared to the first one, because now I know how to do it. You know what I mean? So Marcia, if you want to go forward, it'll be a lot easier. So thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Rebecca, do you have a question?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Hey, all of your books sound really cool. So I thank you guys for coming. But I was curious how you find the time for writing. I tend to have trouble balancing, work and family life and whatever. How do you find the time to write?
I think Jennifer is the absolute expert on that. I have a ton of flexibility, but when I was working full time and dealing with a very crazy family, I mean, most of my kids are more or less grown up now, but I always loved, it wasn't like I was on any big deadlines, but this was the margins of my life. This was a little time for me. And I did give up a lot of hobbies, like I used to scrapbook and things like that. But it was just so satisfying, The The editing, not so much, but. But
I would have
Jennifer,
to find a place to write and set a time to write, because I also have, I work 30 hours a week. So it's not totally full time, but it's a lot. I would go to the library. I would set aside time for writing buddies so we could keep ourselves accountable, meeting at a coffee shop. I would try to write when it was best for me personally, which is in the morning. And fortunately, I have a job with flexible hours, so I could do that. And it's kind of all those things, and then also trying to cut out things that feel like they're less important, at least for the time being. Some hobbies and things.
Marcia, how about yourself?
Well, it's hard, because I have a huge family, a lot of responsibilities. And what I ended up doing was combining being able to go away take 3-4 days away. Luckily, we have a cabin in the mountains, but if we didn't, if I could afford it, I would go away and work steadily a good bit of the time that I would be away. And then at home, I would look at my calendar, and if I saw a few hours where nothing was scheduled and I was at home, I would just go in my office and write, even though I would be interrupted. I had to do it that way, or else it would never have happened.
That reminds me of something too, a great thing that I learned from another author. I want to give her credit, and I can't draw her name to my brain right now, but she wrote, she teaches a thing called the chunky method, where you have to figure out if you're a big chunk writer or a little chunk writer. Some people have to go away into a cave for a weekend and write a gazillion words. I'm not one of those people. Other people work better if there's ambience around, if you've got an hour, half an hour, if you've got a notebook at your lunch hour, you can jot down things. I did a lot of that. So that was kind of the way I work. So you have to figure out which one of those two is your process, and then try to figure out how you can make your schedule fit that process.
That's interesting, because I would say I'm a little bit of both. I seem to be able to move back and forth. It's lucky for me. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to build on that. I'm probably a little both too, but very often, like, I'll write the first draft and I'm like, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever done in my entire life. Oh, it's awful. And but it will kick around. Like, I had this big chunk in my book. I'd written all around it. I said, I have to have an unfortunate incident right here. Well, I ended up putting him in jail. He gets his head cracked and he ends up in jail. And then I thought, oh, I'll have the mom bail him out and I'll have this whole big touching scene, but that's the kind of thing that comes to me, like when I'm on a walk, you know what I mean? Like I'll get it down on the paper and I go, I know this is crap, but then it's like the other part of your brain kicks in, the creative part. And you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah.
That happens to me when I'm in the shower.
Right,
I get
there
my
you go.
best ideas either in the shower or mowing the lawn.
And Agatha Christie used to say she got it washing dishes. So yeah, Allie Plater, P-E-L-I-T-E-R is the name of the author that talks about the chunky method. But yeah, and I posted recently on Facebook about how I was vacuuming and suddenly the perfect wording popped into my head. And so I literally dropped everything and went to my computer to write.
Yeah, I was going to say that happens to me. And boy, if I don't write it down right away, it's gone again. So if you're in the middle of mowing the lawn, it could be a problem.
Well, when I'm driving, it will come to me. So I take my wedding ring off and I put it on the other hand. But half the time I'm going, what was it? What was it?
That's why I have notepads all over the house and in my car, just in case.
And I have my little audio pearl quarter device in my car too. And I've done some great dictating that way.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I've done that.
All right. Well, ladies, again, my thanks for joining us this evening. This was absolutely fascinating, and I wish you the very best of luck with these projects. Now, does anyone have any good news to share? Anything going on that you'd like to talk about? Anybody? Okay. Let me tell you, before we adjourn though, I've been trying to, as you know, this whole year is our 20th anniversary. And so I'm trying to get together some very special events over the course of the year. And one of the first that I've arranged is a workshop with Chris Spizak, who I call our grammar guru. Some of you may remember that Chris presented it Right Now a couple of years ago. And so in March, she's going to be doing a workshop called Fiction and Memoir Editing Secrets. And I'll read real quick here what it's about. She says, yes, there can be a method to the editing madness. Having a revision strategy in place and clearly defined goals can bring your manuscript draft from average to awesome if you're ready to put in the effort. Don't skip the necessary steps that allow your project to become what you've always envisioned it to be. In this workshop, attendees learn how to rethink their editing processes, dividing it into 3 stages. All will walk away with macro editing goalposts and techniques, micro editing cheat sheets and strategies, proofreading tactics to put to use right away, and the knowledge that self-editing is an essential tool in every successful writer's tool belt. So I'm really excited about this, and Chris is also. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, and I'll be making a formal announcement to the group a little bit later. So, and I'm also trying to arrange our first TAF Talk guest this year, and I'm leaning towards Joe Finder. We'll see if he is amenable. So before we adjourn, does anyone else have anything to talk about? Okay, well, you guys are awesome. This was a great meeting. Thank you all for coming. And I will see you in the last Wednesday of March. Keep writing.
Lovely. Thank you, Don.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, Don.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Nan.
everybody.
That was great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Jennifer,
Thank you
we
so
gotta talk.
much.
We gotta talk, girlfriend.
Bye-bye, everybody.